Happy 2025. Welcome to the new year and hopefully a brand new calendar's year of success for the Winnipeg Jets and all of us as Winnipeg Jets fans.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are obviously chatting about the start to 2025, which for Winnipeg maybe could have gone slightly better. You know, one of those situations where you go on the road on New Year's Eve, and obviously it being the second half of a back-to-back against the Colorado Avalanche probably did not go the way the Jets were hoping. But it is what it is. If ever there was a game that you would probably call a schedule loss, end of the calendar year on the road against Colorado, after you just played a very difficult and very physical game against the Nashville Predators, probably not expecting to come away with even a point. But despite this, what I will say is that the Jets did put up a reasonable fight by their standards. I think the biggest thing that I always take away from games against Colorado is that I continue to see some of the same things that hurt the Jets last year. And eventually, I think these things will become less and less of a concern as time goes on, more so in the future seasons, right? I think the way the Jets are starting to draft and trying to build a faster, more skilled team with more versatility in the lineup, it's looking better for the future. But I think for this season, you know, this kind of game shows that the Jets really need to hit the trade deadline out of the park. I think Winnipeg has a really good opportunity to reinforce the squad and honestly reward it. You know, the Jets right now are still first in the league. Yeah, you know, the teams behind them have a couple of games in hand, but Winnipeg is still sitting there, 55 points through 39 games, which by any stretch of the imagination is extremely impressive. Yes, you know, it is a little bit disappointing to end the year on a loss, but I think we all kind of knew it wasn't going to be a particularly easy game to win. And, you know, you're going to look at the standings and you're probably not going to care that much. You know, Colorado's start was so bad this year that even with that win and just one game in hand, they're still like 9 points behind the Jets. So Winnipeg, obviously not going to stress too much about this. But like I said, I think, you know, a couple of big trends come out of a game like this. If you sort through and sort of filter out the noise, right? What did you notice? Colorado generally was just faster, and that's always been the thing that hurts the Jets. And it's not just in, you know, north-south speed. One thing that I think a team like Colorado always does really well against Winnipeg is the very quick side-to-side passing, especially along the half walls. That tends to force the Jets to almost do like the PK Diamond, shifting laterally, which always stretches the play, and it leads to a lot of missed assignments. Now, Eric Comrie was in net. I thought he had the last few weeks, which again, he's not playing a lot, but you know, in those games where he does start, you're not really asking him to be perfect, just to give the team a chance to win. And he did more than his share. Actually, I thought he might steal the Jets a point because they did tie the game at one point. And I thought that they were going to maybe somehow come away with, you know, at least 1 point out of this. But unfortunately, you know, Colorado is just Colorado. It didn't hold for too long. It is a little unfortunate that Eric was not able to record a victory. You know, for as many starts as I think he's been very decent in, he really just doesn't get the run support, which, you know, I think he kind of comes in not really, you know, being surprised by this. His job is to basically just rest Hellebuyck every so often, and that usually will come at the expense of probably the quality of the team ahead of him. I saw some comments asking why you wouldn't just start Hellebuyck instead in the second game. And I think on the one hand, I can understand why you would want to do that. But here's the reality, right? Colorado's just a better, faster team when it comes to 5v5 offense. And so Hellebuck to me doesn't really change the calculus. Yeah, maybe he saves one extra goal or something, but I think at the grand scheme of things, right? You probably feel that at home you've got a better chance of beating the Preds. And it's not like Nashville is that easy of a team. They're bad, but they can still be a pest. And it's probably, something where if you think you can at least guarantee a win out of one of these games, you want to go with your starter if you think it's something that you can pretty much tip the favor or tip the odds and really gain home ice advantage. And I think that's where starting Helly against Nashville actually it's a very pragmatic decision. You sort of accept that the Colorado game is probably not going to go super well. If Comrie somehow does steal you a point or two, that's awesome. But you're not really expecting to come away with a result. And I think that was probably what Arneal was getting at here. Would it have been great if Winnipeg was able to come away with a point or, some sort of a result? Yeah, I think it would have. Obviously, Colorado has kind of had our number the last couple of years. And I think that just tends to be, really a reflection more of Colorado's quality and how they've built their team. And I hope that it it sort of serves as a template for the Jets going forward. I think Winnipeg philosophically is still a step behind what Colorado has built. And this isn't like necessarily an explicit indictment of Winnipeg. More so, Colorado was awful for many years. They tanked. They ended up with McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar. And I think you see that really reflected in how their core has kind of formed around these group of players. And it's why, they're a Stanley Cup winner. And so, the Jets, I don't think have to echo that necessarily. When you really think about it, the Jets already have players who are, quite frankly, of a lottery pick sort of quality. Morrissey is a Norris contender every so often. Hellebuck is arguably the single most valuable player in the whole league and maybe has been for the last few years. McDavid, of course, will have his own argument for this, but in terms of like who you could argue a franchise MVP for like the past half decade is, I think Hellebuck has as good an argument as any, right? He really should be in more Hart conversations on a pretty routine basis. This year, I think that there's a really good chance that he is. And he just provides so much surplus value to this team that sometimes I think the Jets have been able to get away with a lot more than other teams might with, anyone who's just even slightly lesser than what Helly is. But for Winnipeg, this year, I just think it's going to be an uphill battle, and I don't really want to see either of Colorado or Vegas in the playoffs. But if the Jets have a really good, trade deadline, both of those teams still play a style that gives Winnipeg fits. But I think there's a real opportunity to maybe come away with a series win. This game wasn't as bad as the playoff series last year. The shot clock was definitely pretty lopsided, and I do think Winnipeg eventually really did start to wear down, which is not shocking. Again, they just played Nashville the night before, so a rested Avs team on the road, not exactly a winning recipe if you ask me. But, I think the effort was there, the will was there, the legs weren't there, and Colorado's natural speed is always going to be a problem for the Jets. But, if you're going to close out 2024 with a loss, it wasn't like an embarrassing game. It wasn't one where I came away feeling like the Jets should be, accountable for an awful performance. It wasn't great. I'm not going to sit here and say the Jets were particularly good, but just one of those things where, the schedule makers really didn't do Winnipeg any favors. If I had, a choice, I would have preferred having Nashville on the second night and, having the Avs at home in Winnipeg. Maybe things would have been a little different, but you don't get that choice. And so the Jets are just going to have to roll with the punches like everyone else and figure out ways to, maybe find an extra gear in some of these games. But it is what it is, on to bigger and brighter things. And hopefully, with a return home against the Anaheim Ducks later this evening, the Jets are prepared for a bounce back performance. Obviously, the Ducks themselves haven't been nearly as bad as I think people were expecting. And, Sure, the Ducks may not win many games, but they beat the Jets not that long ago on a really bad play to Troy Terry, and maybe this time the Jets can come away with some revenge of their own. But we'll chat about what to expect from this Ducks team in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, so many other options. And one of my favorite memories was actually going to a Knocked Loose concert this past year. The energy and excitement were incredible. And I really feel like you should experience the same kind of thing, whether you're into music or sports. And Game Time wants you to have that opportunity. They've made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. For me, I'm probably going to be using Game Time searching for Ravens playoff tickets here over the next couple of weeks. And what's great is I can actually see seat views before I buy, and they will show you the best possible deal and the hottest deals on the best seats in the stadium. If, like me, you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about, maybe a little bit of disappointment at the end of 2024, although you really can't be that upset with the Jets still in first place. Dropping a decision to Colorado, not the best way to close out the calendar year, but, I think we all sort of understand where the Jets stand in comparison to Colorado, and certainly how it's been in the past with the playoffs and stuff. And, second half of a back-to-back on the road, you probably weren't really expecting a win. Now, where I do expect a win is the Jets return home this evening against the Anaheim Ducks. Now, the last game against the Ducks perhaps didn't go according to plan. Maybe the Jets were, not at their best. They did have some mistakes and things in their game that I think they probably would admit they'd have preferred not to have had happen. So with the Jets now beginning a really long homestand, I think it's important for their Winnipeg to come away with as many wins as possible. They'll even get a revenge match against the Colorado Avalanche here in a couple of weeks. And one of the first revenge matches they're going to have up is tonight against the Anaheim Ducks. Now, you're going to laugh and say, a revenge match? But yeah, the Ducks beat us last time. Neil Pionk getting picked off right in front of Helly. It was a really bad play. Troy Terry, who's actually super good, and I don't think people acknowledge that enough. But, he basically got gifted a free turnover. Guess what he's going to do in front of net? He's probably going to score. So you really can't be giving him any sort of opportunity to come away with an easy goal. Now, the Ducks offense, looking at the roster, is not as bad as you might expect, but it's also not good. Up front, they've got Vetrano, Strome, and Terry. This is obviously the danger line. Vetrano is still probably in some capacity a little underappreciated. Always that very good middle six scorer. Troy Terry is, certainly, their franchise player, right? They don't have a lot of truly elite talents. They've got some guys waiting in the wings who are coming up, or, a guy like Minjukov, who's, certainly a work in progress and starting to get there. But, Terry right now is their number one danger man, and a guy that the Jets probably don't want to have scoring like he did last game. Going to be really important for the Jets to then manage the puck carefully. Second line, you've got Killorn, Carlson, and Leeson. Obviously, Leo Carlson is hopefully for the Ducks one of their centers of the future. But as of right now, this line is, to me, looking more like a third line. And when you look at their actual third line, at least on, one of the daily face-off listings, you've got Gauthier, McTavish, and Fabry, which is, a solid trio of scoring talent. I think McTavish recently has kind of been a little up and down. I know his first year or so was very exciting, and then things have sort of tempered down. So, for the Jets, this top nine should be an opportunity for Winnipeg to hopefully have a pretty big game at home. I think it's going to be a little different than the road game, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll just have to see. The fourth line, Johnston, Lindstrom, and Harkins, come on, like the Jets should have a really good opportunity to win this matchup. They've generally done better against bad depth, but that's not always the case. You've had instances where maybe things haven't always gone according to plan. We will see again our old friend Jake Trouba on defense. They've got Lacombe and Gudas on the first pairing, Dumoulin and Trouba on the second, and Minjukov and Hellison on the third. Now, after I've said, I've said a decent bit about a lot of this roster. If there's one player that I think is particularly concerning for the Jets, it's going to be Dustall, right? In net, Lucas is very good. He is quietly putting up one of the few Vezina competitors. Now, he's not really close in my mind just because Hellebuyck is A, playing about 1 million games, and B, playing so far above everyone else that I don't even think it's worth looking at other Vezina candidates right now. But Dustall is probably one of the few guys that I think has a really good case as a decent finalist, right? Behind this Ducks defense, you wouldn't really expect him to put up really good results, but he's been fantastic for them. He looks like the present and future for this team. And as John Gibson probably gets prepared to move somewhere, Dustall looks like the guy to be the number one of the future. But I don't know when that'll happen. Gibson may not have incentive to move. I don't quite know what's going to happen with that yet. I don't know if Gibson himself is going to try and get traded. So in the meantime, one of these two guys is going to be in net for the Jets game. Gibson was day-to-day recently, so we'll have to see if he gets the call. I would imagine Dustall is going to be the starter, but we'll just have to wait and see later today. I do think, though, that I'm expecting a general performance from this Jets team. I think Winnipeg is going to be good. I think, they're going to beat the Ducks. I think it shouldn't be a blowout, but I think it'll probably be at least a pretty reasonable performance from Winnipeg. I'm kind of calling maybe like a 4-2 or 4-1 scoreline for the Jets. Hellebuyck's probably going to get the start. I actually wouldn't hate it if Comrie got the start as well. Eric, I think, deserves more chances to try and add to his win total. It's not been fantastic, but, it is what it is. I think as far as the Jets are concerned, manage the puck. Don't be silly. Don't do anything crazy. And hopefully, you come away with 2 points that shouldn't be too difficult. I guess the biggest question that I kind of have for a game like this is what the Jets are doing with their defense. They keep trying all these random pairings. We've seen Stanley and Pionk together, Miller and Coughlin. We've seen Miller and Pionk. I mean, they've just tried everything and anything. And, I did mention that I wanted to see more of Coughlin. Would really prefer him not to be on his offhand. When he's on his, left side, that's really where I think he struggles. His first game that they brought him back was on the offhand, and I was just like, I don't know why you would do this. You've got Ville Heinola. Why not use him? Sometimes Winnipeg, I feel like, tries to fit a square into a circle, and like the Jets defense in particular seems to be one of the worst defenders with this. And when I look at other teams and their ability to move the puck out pretty cleanly on the back end, I just don't know why Winnipeg makes it harder for themselves. I know that Arniel sometimes gets boxed in with what he feels are really important role players, but like if they're not good at the role that you're assigning them, maybe just try and go for something else. Sometimes the most important thing to do is just not make life harder for yourself. If you can get to a point where, everyone's doing a reasonable job contributing and you're not dealing with players who are just so far below what you need and holding you back in other areas, but you're still managing to at least be halfway competent, I think when you're dealing with an injury crisis on the back end like the Jets are, that's probably the best approach. You're not going to have a perfect blue line. You're going to have some gaps. You're going to have some things that you give up. But I think the most important thing is to focus on a blue line that can move the puck and get it out quickly. When the Jets are able to quickly pass out of the defensive zone, not only do they tend to score more, you see those stretch plays and stretch passes, whether it's Heinola or sometimes Stanley with it, getting a good jump for one of the forwards. It also relieves pressure defensively without having to, fight physical battles and stuff along the walls. And that's why I feel like a guy like Hanela really is a useful tool set for this team. Is he undersized? Technically. I don't think he always plays that way, but he's not a guy who's overly physical, but he wants to just get the puck up the ice as quickly as possible. And that's something that the Jets just don't have enough of. And so hopefully, one of these games he gets in. Sometimes I think the Jets, again, they overthink things. They try to overcoach. And it gets them in more trouble than I feel is really necessary. We'll also have to wait and see when Sandberg is ready to come back. He is skating non-contact right now, but he seems like he's getting closer and closer. Hopefully, sometime in the next week or two, he draws back in. Hayden Fleury is out for some time. I think I've heard Mason Appleton was week to week, if I recall correctly from what I saw. That is less great for the Jets, but Winnipeg, if there's one thing that they do have plenty of up front, it is guys who can probably fill in your middle or bottom six winger options. They've tried to use Toninato in one of these games. Right now, you've got Niederreiter, Lowry, and Iafallo playing together. They did have a brief stretch last game where Niederreiter, Lowry, and Ehlers were playing together. I'd like to see more of that. That could be an intriguing trio for not only the rest of the season, but the postseason, right? Because if Lowry is your shadow 2C, having Ehlers be a skilled finisher in place of Appleton could be an intriguing look, right? And we know that Perfetti, Nemesnikov, and Iafallo generally have good results together. So something to keep an eye on if they go back to that or if they just try and keep their original arrangement. Hard to say, but the Jets occasionally do tweak those middle six and bottom six lines. So hopefully they can just beat the Ducks relatively cleanly and not have to do a lot of experimentation, but you never know, right? I think, any given Sunday, as they say, let's not take things for granted. Speaking of which, I think for the Jets, 2025, presents a really good opportunity to have a big year. And I want to chat about what I'm personally hoping for this team in just a brief second. But before we go too much further, wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points I think each team is going to score. For the Ravens versus Browns, if I am, cashing in, I would expect at least something like 28 points from the Ravens. I would go over, to be honest. A Jackson 5 wouldn't be out of the question because the Ravens are playing for the division title. Maybe if you're a Steelers fan, maybe you're expecting them to score less than 28. That offense has not exactly been as crazy, and there's a chance that they may rest their starters, but no matter what, the only way to get in on the action is to visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us on these closing thoughts on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about, what I'm hoping for the Jets for 2025. It is obviously, the turn of the calendar year, second day in, and, Winnipeg, I think that they are looking for, some real playoff success, which is easier said than done. That's not always been an achievable thing for the Jets. I'm hoping that this year is different, right? Winnipeg feels a little bit different this season. They came out of the gates this year swinging compared to maybe some of the slower starts of previous seasons. Here, they rattled off like a 15-1 win streak for a while. Things were looking pretty good. They hit some bumps along the way. They've kind of stabilized the last 10 games or so. Obviously, the 5v5 play is still kind of a little up and down at times. There are moments where they play really well and moments where they still have work to do. But I think the overall thing for this organization is to keep growing, keep improving, and hopefully, whether it happens this year or maybe even next season, as some of the young talent really starts to filter in to the Jets ranks, Winnipeg starts building a core that can consistently win in the postseason. They do have a lot of pieces already that can contribute, Hellebuck being the most incredible one among them all, but you've got, Morrissey, Scheifele for the foreseeable future. He's locked up for a long time. Ehlers may or may not be here after this year. We'll have to see. Connor, he's got another year after the season, so we'll have to see what he wants to do. Probably will stick around, though, is my guess. And you've got lots of players like Chipperkov, Lambert. He, at some point in the future, Walton looks like an NHLer. Lots of guys who I think will start filtering in and contribute. And, this year, Winnipeg really can chase the bag without sacrificing the future. And I'm curious to know how Winnipeg wants to play this, right? I would be disappointed if they go conservative, because I feel like this year, you look at the playoff field, and, I don't think that the regular season standings are necessarily an illusion right now. There's just not that many great teams that are truly capable of vying for a cup. I would expect the Florida Panthers to be in the mix towards the end of the season. I think Vegas will be one of those consistent threats. But, do you really feel the Caps are a cup contender? Maybe. I think Washington is very good. But perhaps, to me, they're maybe not built for like elite postseason success, kind of in the way that the Jets are maybe. Washington is one of those teams that I feel is right now kind of winning by committee, and that's something I've always felt with them, with their current iteration. Maybe several years ago it would be a bit different, but where they are now, they're still really good, right? And it'd be really funny if somehow the Jets did meet them in a Stanley Cup Finals, just because it would kind of be like the correct version of what I thought should have happened in 2017, 2018, had Vegas not ruined all of our fun. But, outside of that, you've got the Devils, who generally are pretty darn good. New Jersey, I think, has started to really round into some decent form, although their record hasn't always shown it, and they did just get shut out by the Kings, so I'm sure people are going to be like, well, actually, but generally speaking, Devils, strong defensive team. They have limited a lot of shot attempts against, and just seem to be a real pain in the butt to play. So, you've got some teams out there. Colorado, probably one of the scarier ones if you're on the west side of the bracket. Dallas, if they ever figure their stuff out, could be a real problem. But beyond that, there's just not many teams that I think particularly scare you. And a lot of them, if you're looking at the Eastern bracket, you're not even going to see unless you make a cup finals. And so for the Jets, this really does feel like a season where you can do some real damage. Last year, they did have that same opportunity. They did try to chase it. It didn't quite go nearly as well as I think they were hoping. This year, now that you've got Arneal and a chance to maybe move past some of what Bones didn't always get right, this is a good opportunity for Winnipeg to make some adjustments, continue the growth and progress, and hopefully abandon some of the things that continue to drag this team down. I don't want to point fingers necessarily, but we all know that the way that they look at the Jets defense, that could use some serious work. They're still pigeonholing themselves on role players and on specific things that they want their guys to do. And sometimes they just need to admit that maybe those players and skaters that they're asking to do this aren't quite prepared to handle that responsibility. So, 2025, I think is a year of a lot of promise. They'll have half, a good start to the season in the second half for, 2025 into 2026. But before then, hopefully a deep playoff run. Would love if they somehow parlay, maybe a couple rounds in the postseason this year. I would love to not have them out in the first round again, but you can't always pick and choose. Sometimes you just suck, and that is part of the reality and cruelty of the playoffs and the postseason. But, I would love for the Jets to get rewarded for the regular season performance. They've been doing really well this year. It would be nice if, their MVP in net is also able to parlay that success that he's had in the regular season into the playoffs. Hopefully the team in front of him, doesn't let him down like they did last year. And we get, more than a couple of games of postseason hockey. But let me know what you're most hoping for from 2025. Drop that in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Friday's episode, obviously, we will have a recap of Winnipeg versus Anaheim. I am begging the Jets to come away with 2 points. Let's start off 2025 with a bang. But thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.